You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have a lot to get to today. Not only the usual fighting words and surrealism corner, and the conversation, which this week is with Cara Robertson, the author of a fascinating can't-put-down book on Lizzie Borden and the Trial of Lizzie Borden. And we're going to look at how Missouri is poised to become the first state in the Union to shut down all access to abortion. But there is also an action that you can take that is wicked, private, legal, utterly subversive, fun, and also meaningful. So all that's coming up, but before we get to any of it, we have to go inside the headlines. On the one hand, it feels like it's been storming for 3 years at least. But on the other hand, it feels like the calm before the storm. Debates continue over just what Special Counsel Mueller really meant in his one public statement in front of the cameras, while Missouri is deciding if it will become the first state in the U.S. without access to abortion services. By the time you hear this, Congress may have moved to begin the formal process of opening impeachment hearings, and Missouri may have closed down that last Planned Parenthood clinic, thus returning the state to 1974, the year after the Supreme Court ruled its landmark decision, Roe v. Wade. That same Supreme Court, now much changed, sidestepped part of a major abortion case last week, a sign that the court is trying to tiptoe around the abortion issue. In an Indiana case, the justices tried having it both ways. They heard an appeal that asked the court to reinstate the state law banning abortions sought solely because of the sex or disability of a fetus. However, the court upheld part of the same law requiring abortion providers to bury or cremate fetal remains. The case could have given the court its first chance to consider the constitutionality of a state law restricting abortion since the court tilted radically to the right with Kavanaugh replacing Kennedy last year. Unfortunately, the opportunity will come again. Numerous other states, including Alabama, which, as you know, banned almost all abortions with no exception for rape and incest, for one. Other cases that bar the procedure so early in the pregnancy the woman might not yet even know she's pregnant are still making their way up to the Supreme Court in an outspoken campaign, an admitted campaign, to force the court to accept cases and then, with its findings, overturn Roe. The court's decision on this Indiana case was issued without briefing on the merits or oral arguments, was unsigned, and only 3 pages long, and the court stressed that its decision on fetal remains was not a ruling against abortion rights, which is absurd. Think of the psychological violation that this ruling does to women who must funerarially bury the fetal tissue as if it were a viable infant. Both Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor said they would have denied the review of both issues in the case. Mike Pence, when governor of Indiana, had initiated this very Indiana law. Such obsessive attention focused on pregnant women is not mirrored by comparable attention to women's health, not by a long shot. As has happened in heart disease, Parkinson's disease, and other diseases for which medication is being researched, trials of HIV vaccines and treatments have not included enough, or at times even any, female participants. But women comprise more than half of the 35 million people living with HIV worldwide. The virus is the leading cause of death among women of reproductive age anywhere on the planet. In Africa, parts of South America, and even in the southern United States, new infections in young women help sustain the epidemic. Women and men respond differently to HIV infection, yet clinical trials persist in relying on the participation of gay men. Women represent a median of 11% only in cure trials, and in trials of antiretroviral drugs, only a little bit better. There are well-known differences in the immune systems of men and women, but those are being studied barely at all, at least not vis-a-vis HIV. In rare cases where scientists try to enroll women in the trials, they face additional scrutiny from the FDA, which has strict rules for including women of childbearing age. Yet another rule based on greater concern for offspring or potential offspring than for the woman herself. Looking abroad, attacks on Afghan schools have tripled from 2017 to 2018, according to UNICEF. The number of Taliban attacks increased away from the battlefield at soft targets. Schools are soft targets, and the number of children dropping out of school has also increased last year for the first time since 2002. Schools in Farah province in western Afghanistan were given an ultimatum by local Taliban leaders: fire all male teachers and replace them with women. The local government obeyed, but that was not enough. Armed men on motorcycles set fire to 2 girls' schools, ending classes indefinitely for nearly 1,700 girls. 4 other girls' schools in the province have been attacked in recent months, and about 400 schools have closed over the past several months across the entire country. The Taliban claims they've changed about education, but apparently there's a split, with some Taliban civil authorities willing to tolerate girls' education, but with Taliban military combat commanders against it. Meanwhile, the attrition is real. Now girls are scared of education, and their families are reconsidering the safety of letting them go to school. One administrator said, quote, "Even if we could open the school, the students probably might not come anymore." But there also is good news from abroad. Ireland seems bent on emerging from the 20th century, or some might say the 19th, and entering the 21st complete with drums and whistles. You might recall their 2015 vote to legalize same-sex marriage, which was the world's first popular vote on marriage equality. And you may remember a referendum last year that repealed Ireland's ban on abortion in almost all circumstances, including rape and incest. Then, in October, the nation voted overwhelmingly to lift the ban on blasphemy and deleted that from the Constitution. Now it's divorce. Ireland has voted overwhelmingly to ease restrictions on ending a marriage, moving even further toward liberalizing a constitution that once was controlled by the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. 82% of voters in the late May referendum approved change. The country made divorce legal in 1995, but that law imposed strict conditions, including a provision that a couple must have lived apart for 4 of the previous 5 years. That's gone now. The Irish are getting real good at this progressive stuff, and we welcome them, overthrowing superstition, homophobia, sexism, and religious control, and dancing toward a modern secular society. The day may soon come when Ireland might model progressive democracy for us in the United States. We have to take a short break here, but still coming up is Fighting Words and Surrealism Corner and The Conversation, and that delicious thing that you can do all by yourself, which will make good trouble. for the patriarchy. But first, when we come back, we have to go into the surrealism corner. Ooh. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and welcome into the Surrealism Corner. Women recognized immediately that artificial intelligence systems, like Amazon's Alexa and Apple's Siri, contribute to sexism. Now, UNESCO has released a new report confirming that Siri, Alexa, and other AI systems often have a default that is of female and submissive style, which reflects the lack of diversity in the tech industry, which in turn reinforces gender stereotypes. Alison Gardner, co-founder of the group Women Leading in AI, said that group had a list of recommendations much needed, including establishing a regulatory body to audit algorithms, investigate complaints, and ensure that bias is taken into account in the development of new technology. That would be nice. And research confirms yet another truth universally acknowledged by women, that offices are too damned cold. Who has a sweater? Who has a shawl? Aren't you freezing? Yet the men say it's just fine. Well, it's not. Turns out that at colder temperatures, men score higher than women on both verbal and math tests. But as the room gets warmer, women's scores rise significantly. In fact, when the temperatures increased, the gender gap disappears on the math test, and women also outpace men on the verbal test. The moral of the story: insist that the air conditioning be turned down in the summer, and in winter that the heat be turned up. Do not settle for sweaters. Tempers, not temperatures, were high among Democrats and independents in 2016 when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, denied Judge Merrick Garland, President Obama's choice to fill a Supreme Court vacancy, even a standard Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. For over a year, this was denied. McConnell cited election year Senate tradition to keep a seat open until a new president could be inaugurated, but that was over a year later and had never been done. Then he did the reverse with a Trump appointee before the midterm elections. But in this case, McConnell claimed it was okay, you see, because it was not a presidential election. Now, when asked what he would do if there should be an imminent vacancy on the court with 2020 presidential elections looming, McConnell grinned and brazenly announced that he'd happily fill that seat, of course. It leaves me inarticulate with rage. He means another Trump appointment. When accused by Democrats of shameless hypocrisy, McConnell all but giggled. He giggled. This is so surreal that it's psilocybin level surreal. A lateral leap, because Mitch McConnell has been compared to looking like a turtle, which is unfair to turtles. Almost all snails, however, inhabit shells that coil to the right. But now and then some are born with shells that are lefties. Mirror image, or chiral, that's C-H-I-R-A-L, chiral snails, including a few species that are all lefties, have been a mystery for scientists, yet they possibly are thought to offer clues to the evolution of other animals. For example, approximately 1 in 10,000 people are born with a condition where their internal organs are flipped like a lefty snail shell. Now, a team in Japan has employed the powerful gene editing tool CRISPR to manipulate a single gene responsible for shell direction in the great pond snail. The research, published in the journal Development, offers definitive proof of the genetic underpinnings of a left or right-handedness in that species of the great pond snail, but it could also lead to clues about left and right-handedness in other organisms. An aside about left-handedness: did you know that it was associated with evil during the Middle Ages? I can hear you say, what wasn't? No, did you know that the so-called bar sinister image on heraldic coats of arms signified illegitimacy? In fact, the word sinister was applied to left-handedness, and often Wiccans and witches were thought to be left-handed. If you were left-handed, you were thought comparably to be a witch. Anyway, whether today you are left or right-handed, you can deploy this next wit weapon to your delight. This item is fun. So, recently we covered how Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin recently announced a considerable delay for the promised 2020 issuing of a new $20 bill with the great Harriet Tubman's face on it. He said that a delay could go 7 or more years to 2026 or even later, supposedly for forgery and security measures, but we know that Mnuchin is counting on a second Trump term, and that Trump loves Andrew Jackson, the rough-hewn Indian massacring populist, and wants his face to remain on the $20 bill. However, neither Trump nor Mnuchin counted on the ingenuity of the resistance. Some enterprising young people have created a Harriet Tubman stamp. Not a postage stamp, you understand, but a press down on an ink pad, then leave an impression stamp. It is sized perfectly to fit over Andrew Jackson's face on the $20 bill. Now, it is not illegal to do this, and it is not considered defacing currency. So long as you don't alter numbers that display the worth of the currency, or scroll obscenities on the bill, or change any of the writing on the bill. So long as you do none of those things, it's not considered defacement or a crime. The Tubman stamp doesn't do any of these things, so go for it. You can get yours online by Googling Tubman stamp, or checking out Tubman via a link on Etsy, and then get yourself an ink pad, practice a couple of times on plain paper, and after that, well, free our currency to honor someone worth honoring. Put those Tubman 20s into circulation. It's legal, it's subversive, and it's gleeful fun. Last, our word for this week from another language that is untranslatable to a single word in English. It's yet again from German. Weltschmerz. Weltschmerz could describe how you feel in times like these, say after reading the newspaper or watching a news broadcast. Weltschmerz literally means world pain, the emotions ranging from mild depression straight on up through outright grief and despair. There's a lot of Weltschmerz going around these days, and worse, it's all in response to facts and objective causes. In other words, the Weltschmerz is none of it even surreal. Time for another short break before we return with the conversation and an exploration that took the author over a decade into the life and the truth of what really happened with Lizzie Borden. And did you know, I didn't, that Lizzie Borden was peripherally involved in the women's suffrage movement? Well, more on that when we come back in just a minute. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again, this time with the conversation. Think of it. Picture it. 1893, Fall River, Massachusetts. One of the most anticipated events of the year and one of the greatest murder trials in the world's history. Hundreds stood outside trying to get into the courthouse. It was the trial of Lizzie Borden, a 32-year-old woman charged with the murders of her father and stepmother, charged with brutally hacking them to death with an axe. Well, now Lizzie walks again through a book by lawyer and legal scholar Cara Robertson, who for over 20 years has researched the case. It began as her senior thesis as a student at Harvard in 1990 and went on to include analysis of trial transcripts, newspaper articles, unpublished local reports, and recently unearthed letters from Lizzie herself. It's a definitive account and a window into the golden Gilded Age. So here is Cara Robertson and Lizzie Borden. Cara Robertson, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you.
You have written an addictive book. It is called, of course, The Trial of Lizzie Borden, A True Story. This book was 20 or so years in the making, am I right?
That's right. It started out originally as my senior thesis, and I left it, thinking I was finished at a few points and brought it back. And then just found myself drawn to the material again and wanted to tell it in a way that just laid out the story as it actually happened, from the beginning to the end to the curious afterlife of the case.
Yeah, wow. I mean, she haunted you. She wouldn't let you put her story down. What is so... Well, there's so many things that are fascinating, and it's a woman's story, and it's written by a woman with the nuance that implies. But also you're a historian, you're a lawyer. You bring so much richness to this. The social context, her being a woman, I've totted up the figures. I mean, her life overlapped with Seneca Falls, and Stanton and Anthony and all of that women's agitation, in the 19th century as women began to insist on being at all visible, but also with the context in Fall River, the refugees who'd been coming in, it was a mill town, the mill girls, the nice white women of a certain class that the Bordens were. It's an incredibly rich story, and so many ins and outs that I kept changing sides. She didn't. No, oh yes, of course. No, she couldn't have, all the way through. So congratulations, Cara.
Well, thank you. One of the things that's so fascinating about Lizzie Borden is that, here is this woman accused of these truly horrible crimes that shocked the entire country. But, she's also someone who ticked all the boxes of proper middle-class womanhood.
Right.
She was from what was called a good family. Her father was rich, and she had no need to earn a living outside the home. Mm-hmm. And in keeping with the ideas of separate spheres for men and women, she was active in good works,
right?
Particularly at her church. the culturally sanctioned activity for a woman of her type.
No, the Temperance Society, described her as a virtuous woman, and they should stop torturing this poor, dear, wonderful, virtuous woman.
That's right. And, it's very clear that the assumptions about her fundamental goodness were assumptions that would not have been accorded to, a working class Irish woman had she been accused, for example.
Exactly. On the other hand, the fact that she was self-possessed, as they described her, or even forceful at times, and stood up for herself, went against the grain for what a woman of any class, and in particular hers, was supposed to do or be at that point. And that made her more suspect. It's all these different lenses on her, like a Rorschach, that are so fascinating in terms of the time and the place.
Yeah, I think that her contemporaries actually described her as a human sphinx.
Right.
This kind of unreadable cipher. And as you say, the journalists who tended to be sympathetic to her, focusing, mostly on her class status, saw that could see in that self-possession a sign of ladylike bearing, the sort of inborn dignity that showed her innocence.
Right.
But many others saw it as a very unladylike, sang-froid,
right.
masculine nerve.
Exactly.
That seemed consistent with murder.
Right. I think you have one journalist describing her as, for the first time ever, breaking her self-possessed demeanor. And when the prosecutor pulls the heads out of a bag, she does something for the first time ever in our presence unladylike. She faints. Who in hell wouldn't faint if somebody pulled a head out of a bag? But that's beside the point. I wonder, were you ever, I'm sure if you had, you would have put it in the book, but were you ever able to come across any interlacing of her life or that of the town and the society with the women's suffrage movement, which particularly throughout New England was so present? Right.
The closest connection come from two well-known women of the time. One is Mary Ashton Rice Livermore, who had worked in temperance and then was a founding member of one of the suffrage societies.
Right.
And she had known Lizzie Borden's mother when she and her husband had lived in Fall River. And she came very fervently to Lizzie Borden's defense. And then Susan Fessenden of the WCTU, the Massachusetts chapter, also attended the trial and submitted a resolution in her honor, begging the Attorney General to at least release her on bail. But other than that, Lizzie Borden herself seemed to have quite limited ambitions. That she wanted perhaps a better life materially, but didn't seem to seek any political rights.
Yeah, interesting. Daddy was very parsimonious, and I was shocked that he gave them, she and her sister Emma, $4 a week only allowance, which was the same as a Milltown seamstress would have earned a week for very hard work, I might add, but was considered very little for the day, and he was a real stingy guy, and that was a source of real contention. The assumption that I make, of course, which the folks who made the film last year with Chloe Sevigny made as well, and that many of us would make in the Me Too era, as you point out, the assumption is that there was some sort of early horrific sexual abuse, particularly, given all the other little hints, the adjoining bedroom doors and the bury me at my father's feet. But you don't seem to think that was that operative.
Well, I think we just don't know. And what's striking about it to me is two things. It provides for us an explanation both of the identity of the criminal and the savagery of the murders. That it gives us a reason.
That's right.
But it's also true that a lot of the things that people tend to cite as evidence would have been true of many other unmarried women living at home in that same era, where no catastrophic violence had occurred. So I just think I'd be hesitant to make a statement that that's actually what happened.
Yeah.
That it seems to be an example of how we bring our own lenses to bear on these historical circumstances.
Yes, you're
right. that it's not a coincidence that this explanation suddenly became, if you will, obvious to everyone in the 90s.
Right.
Whereas it had not been the explanation before.
Right. Because now we're aware of the power and the toxicity of women's unexpressed buried rage, and for some reason. It is fascinating how people in the book, real people, spoke to one another. And of course, this happens still in a different way, without understanding that they were speaking utterly different languages. I mean, there are a number of interviews that you have built with staggering scholarship, my God, from sources of the day and records kept, where she is interrogated and they literally don't understand what she's saying, and she literally doesn't understand what they're asking. And it's because they're not factoring either class or race or, most of all, gender. And they're talking right past each other. And so, in a sense, we're doing the same thing today, bringing the lens that we now have today. Do you think it will ever be solved? And those files, oh, Cara, those files. Talk about those files.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating. The Lizzie Borden's lead defense counsel was the former governor of Massachusetts, named George Robinson. Mm-hmm. And he died unexpectedly a few years after the trial. And by reasons of, historical happenstance, his firm still exists. And the files on Lizzie Borden were for some reason preserved. We don't know about his other files. And so the firm's position is that they have a continuing duty, not only not to disclose the files, but not even to describe them.
Makes you crazy. Because, they're still observing privileged correspondence or privileged discussions.
Well, it's interesting because we have the files of another one of Lizzie Borden's defense lawyers with whom she broke later in life. Uh-huh. And who kept his files as befits a cranky Yankee in the attic in an old hip bath. And those eventually made their way to the Historical Society. So it seems unlikely that there's anything in the Robinson files that we wouldn't be able to gather from the other ones. But, well, of course, we'll never know.
Has anybody lodged suit? I mean, there's no heirs to say this is an invasion of privacy, is there? I mean...
Right. It's I think there's a technical legal point that it seems to me it's not strictly speaking attorney-client privilege, because there's no lawsuit or legal jeopardy involved. It's more of a question of the law firm's position on their professional responsibility.
I see.
Though I asked the senior partner if his position is that they can never be revealed, why does he keep them?
Yeah. Hello.
And he responded that it would be abhorrent, and that was the word he used, to destroy them, because he recognized that they were of such historic value. So, it's a dilemma.
Yeah. I can imagine your wild frustration after decades of scrupulous research coming up against this, knowing they're sitting there somewhere, and may or may not contain more answers. But do you have any, I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times, do you have any personal leaning toward theory?
Right. Well, I had a dispute with my editor about whether to discuss a possible solution at the end. And I thought it was important not to, because there's a way in which, one is always has to arrange the evidence to tell a tell a story. But
Right.
I think to maintain one's credibility with the reader and to show that the writer's presenting all of the evidence as straightforwardly as possible, it was important not to try to persuade the reader to one side or the other.
Yes.
I would say that my position hasn't changed much in that it's very difficult as a practical matter to imagine how she actually committed 2 murders in a short space of time and cleaned up twice. But on the other hand, it's pretty much impossible to imagine how anyone else could have done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm content to leave it as a mystery.
Mm. Given the class biases of the day, not that they vanished, but we're at least aware of them now. It's a wonder that the maid, Maggie, wasn't held up to more to more scrutiny. I'm glad she wasn't, and she clearly was innocent, but that interested me. And also the fact that Emma, the older sister, could have, yes, she was away, but she could have snuck back in, but she was away, and we go back and forth on that. It seems to have centered quickly and early on Lizzie.
Yes. Bridget Sullivan was the other most likely candidate. She was the housemaid, and
Right.
as you point out, an Irish immigrant, and she was terrified and had good reason to be.
I bet.
Both because of the murders and because she understood the way that police suspicion usually operated in that era. But she fortunately was out of the house washing windows and spotted doing that task when Mrs. Borden was killed.
Right.
So that seemed to eliminate her as a suspect.
Right.
And of course, Lizzie Borden's behavior was quite odd
Yes.
at the scene. And she also gave shifting accounts of where she had been during both murders,
Right.
which also made her a suspect.
Right. Right. But yes, of course, and also the ignorance of what a woman of her age and singleton, living with the parent and of a certain class, did with her day. I mean, there's the whole thing about she stopped to eat a pear, and much was made over how could she have stopped to eat a pear. Well, if you were a woman of that class and age in that situation, they didn't have a lot of purpose driving their lives, which is one reason why they became active in a social, charitable way. But it's the misunderstandings and cross meanings and just missings that pervade the book that are so both realistic and storytelling vivid. It's a great story that you've told, Cara, and I wish it were more simple at the end, but then we wouldn't have been fascinated with it for so long. And I hope you're still around in however long it takes, 100 years, for the law firm to release the papers, because if there's an answer in them, you're the one to find it.
Thank you very much.
And we're all very lucky to have somebody who was an attorney and who cares about history and who also is just a damn good writer on this case. Thank you for the book. It's called The Trial of Lizzie Borden, A True Story, and Is It Ever? And you will not be able to put it down. So when you start it, clear some space in your calendar because you'll go back to it again and again and again. And even after you finish it, you'll think, wait a minute, what about and go back to that chapter. Thank you, and thank you for being with us today, Cara.
Thank you for having me.
It's time for one last break, and then I'll return in just a moment with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
And we're back with some fighting words. Some listeners write me that they find this program quite helpful, but they're still exhausted, depleted by the ghastly political situation, weary of fighting, literally nauseated about facing escalating struggles during next year's elections. I understand. And sometimes I can get to feeling like an inane feminist version of a cheerleader, going rah, 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 waving my suffrage-colored white and purple pom-poms, chanting, "We can do it, sisters." There are times when I throw my metaphorical pom-poms across the room, cursing a blue stream. Then I come across something that at once humbles and expands me. This time it was an article by Mary Hui in the New York Times. It was about how migrant worker foreign maids, mostly Filipinas, in Hong Kong have taken up trail running, not only for the challenge but for the opportunity to be treated as equals in a society that exploits and discriminates against them. These Filipinas, who add $12.6 billion to Hong Kong's gross domestic product as a service economy, are mandated to live in their employers' homes, which increases the risk of abuse. It's not uncommon for them to be made to sleep in bathrooms, storage rooms, closets. They cook, clean, shop, do laundry, mind children, run errands, do gardening. They're on call 24/7. They find ways to turn their household duties into training opportunities nonetheless, and they squeeze in training runs before dawn or late at night. On weekdays, people say, "Oh, you're a domestic helper," says 30-year-old Fredlin Alberto. But on weekends, on the trails, they say, "Oh, you're a good runner." And a woman named J.B. Pagarian adds, "We are not just a maid. We're not just poor people." Well, it got me thinking back to the time I spent in the Philippines, working with the women, learning from them about the vast expatriate labor force of Filipinas who are exported abroad. And I remembered then that years earlier, during a meeting in Jordan with the then highest-ranking woman in the PLO, herself a Palestinian enduring statelessness and persecution as well as misogyny, her housemaid, who brought in coffee, was a Filipina. I thought of New York subways densely packed with night shift nurses going to work in municipal hospitals for little pay and less respect, and they are Filipinas. During the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, most of the women raped and killed were Asian servants to Kuwaiti households, and most of the Asians were Filipinas. The survivors then spent months huddled in refugee camps at the Jordan border, trying desperately to get home. It wasn't until 1990 that the Aquino government formally outlawed the practice of contracting Filipinas in groups for labor as, quote, domestics abroad. In 1988, though, one could still see the women, each clutching her one suitcase, standing herded together with their contractor overseer at the airport, waiting to be shipped like cargo to Europe, Japan, Hong Kong, or the Middle East. Now, although expatriate labor practices are outlawed, they continue in illegal black market fashion. 3 million expatriate laborers simply bring in too much revenue to be foregone. So the women go, and they support entire families back home by their round-the-clock labor and by being sexually abused by the men of the house and by having no recourse. All this is standard even before a foreign army invades, as happened in Kuwait, and rapes and shoots, and then another foreign army, Iraq, Syria, the U.S., Russia, flies over and makes the sky look like firecrackers, or you fight back against another boss rapist, and then you are arrested and sentenced to death, as in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. All this and your dream of going home someday, of embracing a family you haven't seen in decades. A recent edition of the Oxford English Dictionary lists as a synonym for maid, servant, domestic, the word Filipina. But at home now for some time, in Manila, the Cordilleros, Mindanao, Negros, across the islands, a thriving women's movement is making its presence known. And abroad, Filipinas are trying to organize across geographical distance. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, they're running for respect. If they can do it, surely we can. After all, we're all of us really running for our lives. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live. And that's our show for today. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheRobinMorgan and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheRobinMorgan. Check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for our show. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.